my dress. Well, that's thanks to Randy, and there's, well, I don't know if there are more available, but it's but lovely little shop on Cheap Street. So thank you for coming here, and in case you didn't know why I decided to have a talk in this beautiful space, it's because this was my old school, and as we all find when we get older, we look back at our school days with different thoughts. And I loved my time here, although it was actually, as I later found, a source of some of my traumas, but a really, really special place. And when we came back from Cocos, and Randy and my mum both came here, we met here and had a cup of tea, and I was just amazed, just blown away. It was always a dream that this building would be given love again, you know, it wasn't ever in my budget, so it's really nice that someone else could do it up. But I think there is this theme of loving old houses, old properties. So tonight, what I'm going to do is share with you the beauty of bees, but the theme is also spiritual beekeeping, which ties in with my new book. So I planned the talk not really knowing if I'd have the book ready in time, but I like a deadline. Any of you who know me, I can work to a deadline. So I'm really pleased that the book is ready, and really chuffed with the book, but it is quite a book. It's a big read. So if you've read my other books, this one's 4 times the size, so it's quite a story. So what I'm going to do is give you an idea of the story. There we go. So this is one of my favourite quotes. Those who understand the bee need not fear the sting. And I realise that a lot of my work is helping people move away from fear, whether it's fear of bees or fear of illness, both of which I've managed to overcome. And the real cure for fear is understanding and learning. So by understanding the bees, you no longer need to be so fearful of them, and by understanding your health, you no longer need to be fearful of ill health. So that has been a theme. Oops. I will get into all this. And that was actually me on Cocos working with, go back. This was the first colony that I had access to, and this is very tied in with the quote, because I didn't have gloves, I was working on my own, and I was on West Island where the bees were a little bit more feisty, and this colony were basically only robbed, which is what the beekeeper would say, robbed of honey once or twice a year. So any human that came anywhere near them, they were a little bit defensive. And I had to get to know these bees, and that hive completely collapsed. So as I was taking out the frames, the sides came away. You can see the back where you've got the white blue, then the white. The back of the white is just there. When I was taking out the frames, the whole sides collapsed. So I would have to walk away. I'd set up my camera, filming what I was doing, and I'd just have to walk away and shake all the bees off my hands because they were stinging me all over. And what I learned was having to be really slow and mindful. And what I realised was that with a lot of my beekeeping work, and especially with Kerry and Randy who are here, we were often under time constraints. It was like, right, we'll go and check the bees, and then whenever you open a hive, any of you here who do beekeeping, you know you open up the hive and it's not ever what you're expecting to see. There's always something else that you would like to do in there. And so you always need more time than you have. And so we would have gloves, and we would just have to go in and do what we got to do and then rush off somewhere else. What was amazing here was I was only constrained by the ferry. So I would get the 6 a.m. or the 7 a.m. ferry across the lagoon, go to these bees, be dropped off by a bus, and as long as I was done either by the 11 o'clock ferry, or if not, I could do the 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock ferry. So I had all day, and I learned a lot about bees by having to be slow, having to be calm and still with them. But I've got quite a bit of footage of me walking away from the hive, not swearing. And this photo here is, this was an image that took me 8 months to get. And those of you who are in my membership who are following, I think you might remember when I put it in the WhatsApp group, it's like, yes, I've got this photograph. And this plant is called Pemphis. And for me, that was the first clue that bees were essential on these islands, because Penthis has to be pollinated by bees. But to get that flower in flower with a bee, with the beautiful water in the background, was just such a challenge, and also with such strong winds that quite often the flower wasn't even still. So, you know, I've got lots of blurred images, so I'm particularly fond of that one. So, my journey to bees. I'm sure most of you know about how I came to bees. So I used to be an artist, and then when I was 40, I collapsed, and I spent the next 7 years bed and wheelchair bound. And after 6 years of being wheelchair bound, I got diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a genetic condition. So I was told that I was born with it, there was no treatment, and there was no cure. So they were saying, you know, I definitely wouldn't walk again, and I possibly wouldn't live past 50. So it was quite a damning diagnosis. However, with my mum and with my carers, we'd spent a lot of time researching. So by the time I had the diagnosis, I had already made my mind up that I was going to become a patient of a medical herbalist, and that's what I did. And the herbs, within 8 months, got me much stronger. And then my mum introduced me to some plant-based minerals, which I took, and that really transformed my health. So that sort of journey into bees came 2 years into being bedbound, when Greg, my husband here, actually built me a beehive. My birthday was coming up, and he would say, what do you want for your birthday? And as many of you know, I always liked a big party, big gathering, but that wasn't to be while I was ill. So I just felt I needed a beehive. And I kept saying, I'd like a beehive, I'd like a beehive. And Greg was like, but you haven't got bees and you can't get out of bed. You know, what good is a beehive? But I persisted, and then Greg very kindly built me a beehive and put it in the garden. And then a local chap came in, put bees in, and he taught me beekeeping. Now, what was really interesting was, probably like most people here, we think of beekeeping as being the most natural, nature-connected activity that you could have. What I learned was it isn't at all. There's a lot of beekeeping that's very much like factory farming, and it's very challenging when you're in that environment and you start asking questions. And the first question I asked was, why would we feed bees sugar when they have the honey? And I hadn't realised that the bees need their honey. You know, that they have their honey, that they eat their honey. And it wasn't until we'd harvested the first honey that the next time my mentor came up, he had this pack, and it was white sugar fondant. And I was like, what's this? What are we going to do? And he said, we've got to feed the bees. And I was horrified, because at that point I knew that if I ate sugar, I had more inflammation, more pain, more nausea. So I wasn't eating sugar. Also, as a mother of little boys, I knew that if they had sugar, they were much harder to handle too. They'd be running around and all hyped up. So that was the first time that I challenged and questioned conventional beekeeping. And that made me a bit heretic in the beekeeping world, because everyone feeds their bees sugar. And so it's very difficult when you feel that something's wrong, but everybody's doing it. So how do you come to terms with that? So what I decided to do was research bees. And so where I had been researching my health, as I got healthier, I then started to spend more time researching bees to try and find the reasons behind what I felt intuitively was right. So this all led to my journey to Cocos, and that's what I want to spend more time about here. So back in 1992, before I was ill, when I was an artist, I had a dream. And the dream was this, exactly this view here. I was in an airplane flying over here, and these rocks and boulders, which we now know were sandbags, there was long-haired, blonde hippies sat on those rocks. And I could see the palm trees behind them, and I could see this factory building. And my mum was on the plane with me, and I turned to my mum and I said, that's Cocos, it's paradise, and it's just off the Isle of Wight. It clearly is not just off the Isle of Wight. But that's 1992. So there was so much that had to happen in my life to actually get us there. and it became an obsession. I was just always asking people, do you know where Cocos is? Have you seen pictures of it? Have you got it on a map? What is it? Why did I have this dream? And what was the connection with the Isle of Wight? What's quite uncanny is this house here is the old colonial house on Home Island on Cocos. And the man who built that house, George Clunes Ross, was a Scotsman, third generation who'd been on the island. And he visited England periodically, and while he was on the Isle of Wight in 1910, he died. And his body was shipped back, and everyone was told he was in, well, they were told it was a grand piano, but his body was actually the grand piano. And he went back to Cocos and was buried there. So how bizarre that the third generation of the Clunes Ross family who owned the islands, he built that house with glazed bricks from Glasgow, white brick, so it's the big white house, and he died on the Isle of Wight. But I didn't know that at the time. So my life went on, all kinds of things were going on, and just so you have an idea where Cocos is, so that's Australia, you've got Sri Lanka sort of right up there, and Cocos is there. And then there's Christmas Island, which is not the one that had the nuclear bomb testing, it's the one with the red crabs, so there's two Christmas Islands. And Cocos Keeling in the middle there. And the only thing it was well known for, or even known for, was there was a telecommunications, a wireless station there. So from 1906, was it, till 1966. So quite a lot of British people actually spent time, they would have 6 months or 12 months or 2 years even living on the Cocos Islands, but not on Home Island, they'd be on a separate island direction. So all these pieces had to come together. I had to be an artist and a card publisher. So my paintings were quite expensive, so I went into doing greeting cards, so this is like age 20. And I sold my cards to 700 shops across the UK. And one of the shops had a B&B, and they were in Yorkshire. And we used to go and stay with them. They became really good friends, Jill and Tony. And after I had my dream, I was staying with Tony, and they do really, really nice breakfast, and they had a library in their dining room, breakfast room for guests. And we got to know them quite well, so he was quite familiar with me rummaging through his books. And one time, I was looking through his books, and he said, what are you looking for? And I said, I'm looking for an atlas or a book with Cocos Islands on it. And he said, oh, hang on a minute. And he disappeared, and he came back with a wooden box, and it had engraved on the lid Cocos, and then in brackets Keeling, and then close brackets Islands. I'm like, oh my gosh, where'd you get the box? He'd just gone to an auction and saw the box and thought it was interesting. And in the box there was a few little bit of knickknacks. Well, he had been in the diplomatic service, so he had contacts. So he managed to track where the islands were, and he wrote to the administrators of the islands and then got the history. So he told me about the Clunes Ross family and the connection with the Isle of Wight. So if I hadn't been selling my greeting cards, I wouldn't have met Tony. So he bought the box, and then I'd received a letter. So from Tony, he gave me the address of the administrator, so then I wrote a letter. This was in about 1994, 95. So I sent this letter off, stamped, self-addressed envelope, and in 1998, I got a letter back. And it had a whole group of photographs in there of the islands, the Cocos Islands. I was really hoping for an invitation to go and stay and to be an artist in residence, but none of that. At that time, the islands didn't have any hotels, there was nowhere to stay, it was a very small community. So, and also, very soon after having the letter, I gave birth. So I had my first son, and so I wasn't, inclined to be travelling at all then. So again, it was sort of in the back of my mind. Then I became ill. Then I got the bees. Well, then another thing had to happen. So if I hadn't got into the bees, and if I hadn't got well again, and if I hadn't had the gallery in Castle Carey, I would never have thought, and actually if Greg hadn't been making cider, I would never have done the market in Castle Carey when I got well. But Greg was making cider and it was all over our living room, and so I made a decision we had to sell it. So I had a pop-up Paula stand at the market where I'd sell the apple juice and the cider from Greg, and I'd have my honey and herbal teas and the minerals that help get me well. And whilst I was at the market, I was approached by a tall gentleman that I didn't know, and I knew everyone in Kerry, so I was curious to how I didn't know him. And he wanted to buy my honey, but my honey was under the counter for special people, and I didn't recognise him. So I said, oh, well, where do you live? I have honey for local people. And he said, oh, I live in Hadspen. And I said, oh, that's a nice little village. Which house are you in then? He said, the house. And then I realised it was the man that owns what is now the Newt. So he was chatting to me, and of course we were all really curious about what was going on behind all these fences. So he gave me his business card, but by the time I got home and was thinking, how do you follow up a contact like that? He'd already emailed me. He said, will you come up on Monday morning and have a look around? So of course, yes, drop everything, I was up there. So I got shown around and then told what the plans were for the Newt, that they were going to have hotels, they were going to have these gardens, but it was all about education and telling stories. And then they said the great question to me, what could we do with bees? So I went home and I wrote a 26-page proposal, not straight away, it took a while. And Nikki, where's Nikki? Nikki here, I think you were helping me do that, weren't you? So I was thinking, right, well, what would I do if I had all the money in the world, no time constraints, and could do anything with bees? So that's what I wrote. And then sent it in and just thought, well, I'll see what happens. I got an email back going, great, will you do it? So that's what I did. So started up the bees at the Newt, but had 2 years before they opened. Now in that 2 years, I had to become a bee expert, because I'm not using chemical treatments in my hives and I'm not feeding my bees sugar. So already I'm quite, got a bit of a reputation in the beekeeping world. So if I've suddenly got this gig of doing a bee museum and looking after the bees of the Newt in Somerset, I had to show that I was properly trained. Now what was nice was at the Newt, they had no idea what was going on in the bee world, so they just were quite happy for me to do whatever. So in the summer months, I'd look after the bees, and Randy here joined, I think you too. And then in the winter months, all the money I'd earned in the summer, I just spent on becoming an expert. So I travelled the world, I went to all the scientific conferences, I travelled at the time with Greg to Oman and met beekeepers. So I just built up my knowledge. And what I found was all the scientists were showing that putting chemicals in hives was not good for bees, feeding bees sugar was not good for bees, but there was this block where the beekeepers weren't acting on that. So I then had the confidence to carry on with what I was doing. And I got given the opportunity, I said, well, we need to have a museum, you know, we need to have a building that we can educate people when they come to the Newt. So luckily, they just went ahead and did that, and I did all the content. Well, a year into being there, not being able to tell anyone what I was doing, Greg came one evening when all the machinery wasn't working, so that we could walk around the grounds and I could listen for bees. I was trying to find the wild bee colonies, so I needed quiet. And so I'd snuck Greg in because I thought he'd really like to have a look. And we were going through the woods at the top, and then we dropped down to what is now the threshing barn and where the cidery was. And we could see these big tithe barns coming out through the trees, and they were all fenced off. And Greg was blown away, and we had no idea what was going to happen. But a few months later, there was a staff function, and Greg came along, and then we learned that they were opening a cidery. And when they realised that Greg's hobby was cider, they said, well, why haven't you applied for the job? So Greg applied for the job. And then he became the cellar master and set up the cidery at the Newt. Well, this is quite a key part of the journey, because Greg was employed. I was never employed, I was just contracted. So where Greg was employed, a year before they opened to the public, the owner brought up his friend from South Africa, who was a photographer, and he was photographing all the staff, and he's called Duke. And Duke's photographing Greg, and Greg's chatting away, and Greg goes, oh, my wife was a beekeeper here. And Duke goes, oh, that's interesting, we should have a picture of her. So I get a message and say, come on in, put your suit on. So I'm in there, got my suit on, completely the wrong time of year to photograph bees, so I'm by wisteria with empty comb, and he's photographed me and he goes, oh, I don't like honey. I was like, oh, that's unusual. Why do you not like honey? He said, well, my brother keeps bees, but I don't like the taste of his honey. So I said, oh, you know, where does he keep bees? Cocos Island. And I looked at him and I'm like, you're a clueless Ross, aren't you? And he said, yeah, how did you know that? How have you even heard of Cocos Island? So I told him about the dream. And then he told us about his brother Johnny, who still lives on the islands and keep bees. So that's how we got to go in 2020, because then I knew we had to go. So we decided to go in 2020, but in the meantime, I'd started in 2017 trying to become an expert. I started my honey sensory analysis training, and then that got me a role as a honey judge. And then I met a chap called Emre, who's a Turkish guy who makes beehives, but he makes plastic beehives. Now I'm a natural beekeeper, so I'm not interested at all in plastic beehives. But he tells me, well, we make plastic beehives because we love trees. And in China, it's now illegal to cut down the trees. So we have to make hives out of something. So they do complete food grade hives. So that's just sort of logged in my head, but I thought, well, yes, you're a lovely chap, but I'm never going to deal with your hives. Then in 2020, we go to Cocos, and they have flow hives, they have Langstroth hives or wooden hives, full of mould, full of rot, and then they have some of these plastic hives from Emre in Turkey. I'm like, how did they get here? Nobody knows how they got there, but they got there. So I then realised that on a tropical island where everything has to come from Western Australia, which has some of the strictest biosecurity rules in the world, and the most expensive shipping, with one boat meant to be every 6 weeks, but they tend to be sort of every 3 months, wasn't it? I think we had 4 ships when we were there in a year. And everything has an $11 a kilo surcharge if you ship it. So to ship beehives up regularly because they rot because of the humidity and the tropical environment is just not going to work. So these plastic hives are brilliant because they gave great insulation for the bees, and you only ship them once because, as we all know, plastic lasts forever. So then 2020 we go and visit, so we see these hives, and then 2020, I mean, like many of us, we thought we'd never travel again, and we were just glad that we'd done this trip of a lifetime. But life carried on, and I was invited to speak at a big global bee conference called Apamondia in Chile in 2023. And I was doing my abstracts for what to talk about, and the whole theme was sustainability. And I'd sent in 3 abstracts, and then I got this email going, oh, you could send in another one. So I thought, oh, what else could I talk about? And then I thought, I know, how about using plastic beehives on a tropical island, teaching Cocos Malay women beekeeping, and because you get all the plastic washed up on the beaches, it's a bit of irony that actually plastic beehives could save the bees and be a good use of plastic on this island. So I did this abstract for that, and it got accepted for a presentation. Then Emre said to me, if you do that, then I'll sponsor your beehives, if you can actually get to do that. But we didn't know, how on earth were we ever going to go out to Cocos? And you can't do a project like that in a short period of time. Meanwhile, Greg, who likes Facebook more than I do, found an advert that the Cluness Ross House was looking for caretakers. And instantly it was a hell yes. But there was no way we could do it. We still had kids living at home, Greg had his job, I had my business. You know, it was just too difficult to go there. And Australia, we're middle-aged people. Australia doesn't like middle-aged people to go out there just for a holiday. So it was a hell yes, but it was a no, we can't. And we didn't even get offered the job straight away. But just before we went to Chile, we got an email from the people who were advertising going, are you still interested? Because of course I'd written an email, presuming we could, just saying every reason why we were the ideal people for this role. And they said, are you still interested? So just before we went to Chile, we had a Zoom, and we were like, yeah, okay, well, we'll go to Chile and we'll just have to decide there and then see what we can do. But we couldn't tell anyone, because if we told anyone that we were going to do this, it was okay for me-ish, but it was very difficult for Greg, because if people knew I was going there, they'd know Greg was going there. And if Greg was meant to be leaving the country, he'd be leaving his job, and you want to leave your job on your terms, not when somebody knows you're going to leave and decides you might as well go now. So it was very, very difficult. And Kerry and Randy, I mean, it was so hard for you guys, because I come back from Chile and I go, I'm leaving the Newt. And no reason whatsoever. So the big income, paying everybody's wages, and taking up all our time. And I have to say, no, it's because I want to write a book. And I couldn't say what was really going on. And then in the background, paddling away, trying to pack our stuff up, trying to think what to do. And everything actually happened to help us to go. It was amazing. And Kerry took on the beekeeping at the Newt, so that was really helpful. Then I had a client who offered me to move my business, so I had this amazing workshop in Galhampton, let that go, which was hard. I regret it now. Had a commercial kitchen, and it was just such a nice space, but we just knew we had to go. And we were still waiting for a visa, but the only way we could get a visa to go, because I knew we had to go, so I'm probably the only person who's read every single page of the Australian visa application, is if you are a documentary filmmaker. So I thought, well, I've always wanted to make a film about bees, but I was really hoping that David Attenborough or Netflix would come to me first. But it's like, okay, we have to do this. So we set up a CIC, and we're like, okay, we're going to make a documentary about this. So then we needed a sponsor. So the house said, okay, well, because you can't work for us, because you're old and English, we'll sponsor you. So you'll have free accommodation, and we'll give you $50 a day between you for your food allowance. And don't worry, because we don't have many people staying, so you'll have plenty of time. So that's what we did, and we set off. I went there. Now the other thing that was key to all of this was about 6 months before I went, I joined a business mastermind online. And I joined it because one of the ladies who was setting it up has a really good podcast, and I wanted to be a guest on a podcast. So I've been stalking her, and she suddenly says she's doing a mastermind, so I'm in there. And on the mastermind, you're really encouraged to do one-to-ones, but of course we're all over the world, so we do one-to-ones on Zoom. And Catherine, who sat here at the front, really sort of piqued my interest. So I had a one-to-one with Catherine, and we chatted for half an hour. And Catherine heals property and land. And I was thinking, well, that would be good, but it's not our property and it's not our land, and I'm destined to go to this place, so it'll all be fine. So Catherine was just sort of in the back of my mind, and then we set off. So this is in 2020, so there I am with Jack Clunas-Ross, who's the son of Duke's, so he's Duke's nephew, so the son of Johnny. And there we are with some of the wooden Langstroth hives. And then these are the Acme hives, the plastic hives that you already have there. And you can see, barefoot, bees really quite chilled out. Bees so hot anyway. And this is Cocos Ruin. Now I'll see if I can get... Oh, right. Okay, so you've got 27 islands. This is 26, and there's another one 15 miles north of this. And this is West Island, where you've got an airport, and this is where about 100 white people live. Now, I'm going to talk in the way that everybody talks there. You have white people and you have Cocos Malay. We were Orang-Kuti, white people. So you have white Australians there. Then this island up here, you have 500 Cocos Malay, and you have the old colonial house, the Clunas-Ross house. The other islands, all uninhabited. And that top island, Horsburgh, there's old guns there, and that was someone we always wanted to visit, but you can see the reef. I mean, there's a reef around the whole island, and it drops down between 300 and 600 metres, like straight away. So it's really rough. But this central lagoon, you used to be able to get quite big ships through, and they used to do shipbuilding there, but it's all silted up, and it's actually becoming shallower. And something we did a few times is walk around the reef. You can actually walk like that all the way around the islands. And it was something I really wanted to do in 2020. When I heard you could walk the reef, I was like, oh, I want to do it. But it's a bit scary walking out into water. when you don't know how deep it is or what's going on there. So just to give you an idea, this is where we lived then for a year, and you have the airport here, and you have a jetty there, and you have a ferry that runs a few times a day to take you across. So the bees, Johnny's bees and Jack's bees were round here, and then we were up there. So here we are, leaving Castle Carey. We had a good send-off. So that was April the 11th, 2024, and that was all we took. We had 23 kilos. Oh, we had 30 kilos each, didn't we? So, so there's another big case behind there. And we wore as much as we could. Great fishing rods. And here we are. So in 2020, we had another one of these crazy coincidences. The first day on Cocos, we were staying on the island with the airport. We were trying to hire a bike, and then the house where they hire bikes was all open and unlocked, but they'd gone on holiday, and you couldn't hire bikes. So then we went out on the road and the bus came past. So we flagged down the bus. There's 4 people on the bus. 2 people in the front, 2 people behind, and we jump on. So we go, oh, are you going to the barn art place, which I'd been sent photographs of in 1998. And then we get on the bus and the couple in front go, oh, you're English? And we said, yes. And they said, oh, where are you from? We went, Somerset. And they went, oh, we're Somerset too. So we said, well, we're Castle Carey. And they went, we're Castle Carey as well. So, I mean, there was this couple that we'd never met, and they lived in Castle Carey. They're on the bus in front. And then the couple behind went, did we hear you said you come from Somerset? Now, they were Australian. So Greg's talking to the Castle Carey people. I talked to the other 2 in the back. And I said, yeah, we're Somerset. And they said, did you say Castle Carey? And I went, yeah, Castle Carey. They went, well, you won't believe this. They said, our best friends emigrated from Australia to a little village outside Castle Carey. So I said, wow, you know, well, what village was it? They went, you won't have heard of it. So I said, go on, just try me. Galhampton, where my business premises was. But not only that, their best friends was, gosh, I've suddenly forgotten his
Robinson.
John Robinson. So John Robinson was a really well-known artist that I used to exhibit in my gallery, and he was one of my mentors. So how crazy was that? So then we get off the bus at this art centre, which I'd seen photographs of in 1998 that I'd been sent. And there's this couple looking round there, and we're still talking, we're going, what are the chances of that? Da, 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 da. And then this chap goes, you English, you Poms? We said yes, and he has a Bristolian accent. And him and his wife, Danielle, she's from Romania, they've both been in Australia for about 40 years. So when we've kept in touch with them since 2020, when we said we were coming, they lived 4 hours away from Perth Airport. They drove and met us. and had this sign, Basil and Sybil, thinking, you know, we were going to be there in this house like Basil and Sybil. I don't know how accurate that was. But, so that's John. So it was lovely to be met by them, but we were thinking we would just go to a hotel and sleep. They had other ideas. We did all of Perth in 2 or 3 days, and they literally dropped us off to meet Greg's son, who then met us at Perth. So it was a bit intense the first few days. And then we got to Cocos Keeling, and this is the entrance hall of the house. I bet it makes you feel odd seeing it. And then this was the drawing room. Now it looks quite clean in these photos, but when we got there, it was filthy. It was thick with dust, thick with cobwebs. We actually found we were living with rats, crabs. Crabs used to run in through the house and we'd be trying to get them out. It was, the house needed love and attention. The other thing that happened, where we were told, oh, you'll only have a few guests a month, what happened over the next 8 months was the place was fully booked. So with our $50 a day between us. And these are some of the rooms. And now I've got a photo which may shock some of you, may not. So, you know, beautiful old antiques that have been there for years. And then that was our room. And the plastic woven rugs are actually covering all the chipped tiles. And we later found that the tiles were probably dug up because there was a rumour that the money, the Clunes Ross money, was buried on the floor. So that was our home, that was our little room. So, bees. So we get to this island and I'm thinking, right, I'm going to do a breed project, I'm going to teach these Cocos Malay women beekeeping, because when we went in 2020 they didn't have jobs, there was high unemployment, but through 2020 the Cocos Malay started getting employed because it was very difficult for Australians to move to the island during all the lockdowns. So there was no longer unemployment. And you have this community of Cocos Malay, which is sort of African, Sri Lankan, Malay, Singapore, Chinese, all mixed heritage, whose ancestors were first brought as slaves by Alexander Hare before the Clunes Ross landed. And then Clunes Ross took or released the slaves and employed them and had this coconut factory for years until about 1978. And then the UN accused him of unfairly employment, or breaching employment rules, not slavery, but close to. And then they made him bankrupt because he had a shipping company and they refused to give any contracts to him. So he went bankrupt. So he lost all the islands that he owned and lost the house. So bees, when we went in 2020, in the gardens of the house there was a wild colony. But when we went back, there were no bees. And no one could remember where the bees were. But on West Island, there was wild colonies like this, and there was large colonies like this on the South Island. So the bees were around, but they'd gone from where we were. Now, what also happened, everything flowed to get us to Cocos Keeling. Everything. You know, the business here, you know, getting visas, getting the CIC set up, setting up the documentary, everything was really, really easy. And it was like, the gods were in our favour. The moment we got to the islands, everything changed, and it was really, 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 really challenging. I think day 2, Greg knew that he couldn't work for the manager. I don't think anyone could or should work for that manager. And we had to look up the word narcissist after a few months. And yeah, it was very difficult. Bear in mind, we're both middle-aged people, we've got a lot of hospitality experience, and to suddenly find that you're not able to use your initiative and you have absolutely no access to any of the bookings or anything that was happening. We were constantly on this, not sure what was happening next. Guests would turn up, and also we were told we'd have a boat, we'd have a car, we'd have a buggy. When we got there, the buggy was trashed. There wasn't a car, and then the boat, we weren't told you had to have a special Western Australian skipper's ticket. So despite Greg being ex-Navy, he couldn't drive the boat. So we suddenly had no transport. And the manager and the owners were there when we first got there, so we just spent 2 weeks cleaning the place, feeling we should give a good impression, only to find that really went against us. And a phrase that I used throughout this time was feeling like a queen bee with clipped wings. And it wasn't till the week before we left that somebody said, "What do you mean?" So I'll explain that later. So there were no bees, and all the entomologists who'd been on the island had said there were no bees, and Charles Darwin had been there in 1837. Charles Darwin was there for 3 weeks, where he came up with his coral atom theory, and no mention of any bees. So we knew honeybees were brought in about 1946 by an Australian Air Force chap, but where had they gone on Home Island? Just didn't make sense. And then I was walking between the islands, and then I found this bee. So there are over 20,000 species of bees in the world, but only 11 of them make honey. And I was curious about what would pollinate plants on the islands if you didn't have bees, and what if other bees had got there? Bees get to all sorts of places, and we weren't that far away from Indonesia, so you know there could have been bees. And then I found this little chap, but to start with I only found individual ones, so there was no way I was going to capture it and send it off to get it analysed in case it was the last one. But I was so excited. Now what I was curious about, that I talk about in the book, is through working at the Newt and other projects I'd worked with, I found that bees expand naturally according to the Fibonacci sequence. So So that's how they expand. And so there's this communication, there's this dialogue between bees and flowers. So before the bees can expand, they have to know, or the flowers need to know, to say, okay, well, we have got enough forage, we can provide enough forage for you to expand. And I realised this when I was doing a talk in Saudi Arabia, and it was a scientific talk, and I was an opening speaker, and they kept calling me doctor, and I'm like, I'm not a doctor. So I thought I ought to have a graph or something in my slideshow presentation. So the only thing I thought I could measure was how colonies expand whilst I'd been working with them. And that's when I found this Fibonacci sequence. So I was really interested with this. Now with Cocos, you've got an isolated place. One of the big problems we have in the UK is we're bringing in queen bees, we're bringing in bees, and I know it's wrong, but everyone's like, oh, well, you'll get inbreeding, we have to import queens, you know, otherwise the bees will die out, we've got to do it. So by being on a remote island, we could research the bees and say, well, it's illegal to bring in any other queens or any other bees, so how much diversity do we have here? And, you know, it's an ideal place. And it was going to be great for honeybees because there were no other bees there. And the worry is if you bring in honeybees, you're going to starve out your other bees. Well, then suddenly I find another bee. So that changes everything. It wasn't on our island. That does annoy me. Right, sorry. I've got a little video here. Do you know, it's not going to play. Right, okay. I had a little video that I shared for members when I heard I had taken the photographs of that bee, sent them off to entomologists, and then I got a notification back that it was a Ceratina, it was an actual species of bee, but we don't know yet. When I go back, I can take samples because I now know there's a lot more of them there. So we could have a Paula bee, but we don't know. It's a type of carpenter bee, so it could have come in on a ship or it could have been on a piece of driftwood. So this is the house. Now, things all started to go wrong. We were getting a lot of difficult guests. We were having people showing up that we didn't know were coming. We had people not showing up that we thought were coming. The rooms were double booked, overbooked. Planes were being delayed. Planes were then not going off, so you've got double the amount of people on the island. So it was just really, really challenging. And we had 4 bikes that Greg had repaired from putting together bikes, so 2 were for guests and the other 2 were for us, so that's how we managed. And do you know, only yesterday I got a message through Facebook from a lady who said, can I ask, she was calling from, or contacting me from a museum in Western Australia, and she's been researching the Cocos Malay and their history in this house, and she said, I wonder if you could help me. She goes, can I ask you an odd question? So I said, yeah. She said, while you were at the house, did you do anything? So I said, oh, what do you mean? And she said, well, did you do any healing? So I said, well, why do you ask? And she went, well, I stayed there in December 2023, and this is what she had. Little taps on her feet, and she felt when she was laying in bed, she was being stared at from all sides. And the room ranked of blood and bone fertiliser from sunset to morning. And then there was loud pops from the wardrobe and it felt very menacing. So I started to think about this. This is before we'd heard about this lady, but it was only yesterday that the actual lady got in touch with me. And none of the locals would come near the house. Everyone said it was haunted, but we didn't really feel it was badly haunted. There'd be a couple of times where a room wouldn't, the door wouldn't open. But we weren't happy. Things were really difficult. We'd rented our house out and we couldn't come home. We were committed. So it was like, we've just got to stick this out. And I had no bees. So it's like, what am I going to do? And then Catherine in the mastermind shared a podcast interview that she'd done with a client in Italy. And I listened to it whilst I was ironing sheets at 45 degrees. And also I was listening to, Greg found the Cat Stevens set from Glastonbury Festival, and I loved a song called Morning Has Broken. So I had that on loop, and then I listened to this podcast episode. And in the podcast, Catherine had helped a lady who'd bought her dream house in Italy. Everything had gone wrong. Builders wouldn't show up, it was all very difficult. And together, they healed the house and found there was earthbound spirits, and Catherine helped to get rid of them. So I thought, oh, that's why I know Catherine. So I messaged Catherine, we had a Zoom, and I said, right, I think we need some help. Told her what was going on in the house and that how I'd really connected with this podcast episode. And a little bit concerned because we hadn't raised as much money as we'd hoped for the documentary, and we couldn't get the film crew out, and everything was going wrong. And then at the end I just said to Catherine, so where are you based in England? And she went, just off the Isle of Wight. So that to me was a sign. So we went off, we had to leave the island for a few days. We had like 7 days off, and we went to Bali before our proper visa came through. And then we decided we would work with Catherine. So what Catherine asked us to do then was both independently walk around the grounds. So there was 3 acres that we were managing, and then there was 11 acres was the original site. So we had to walk around, walk into the area of the property, and just make a note of anything we felt, anything at all. So with me, it was just like, oh, it just feels tired, it feels sad, it feels unloved. There's a door that's a bit sticky every now and again. But Greg, who didn't believe in any of this stuff, had an experience with this room, the library. And I was over on the other island playing with the bees and being stung. And he walked past the library, the door was shut, and then he heard a bang. So he called out, there was nobody in there. And then he opened the door, and there were 2 books placed on the floor, just here. So there was a wall of books here, and there was 2 books on the floor, and they were placed. It wasn't a case of they all slid out and fallen, and they were placed. So when I got back, Greg was like, have you only just got back? And I said, yes. And he goes, we haven't got any guests. I was like, no, and no tours being, nobody's being, no. And he said, well, come and look in the library. So we went in the library, and we went in there, and there was these 2 books. So we looked at them and thought, okay. So they know we're talking to Catherine. And one was an embroidery book, and the other book was the Hammer Book of Witchcraft, which is enough to frighten anybody. So I thought, well, let's just open them randomly and see what happens. So we opened up the embroidery book, and a big letter C was there. Then we opened up the other book, and I'll tell you what that said in the book, so you have to read the book for that. But then we knew we had to talk to Catherine. So Catherine read through everything that we had sent in, and then we did a healing. And when you first tuned in to the house and said, can I heal the house, or what healing can we do? And the house said, no, can't heal the house. And Catherine never had this before. So, I mean, how many years have you been doing this work? I mean, a lifetime, isn't it, really? And it said no. Well, luckily, Catherine knew the next best question, which was, well, what can I do? And it said you have to heal the land beneath the house. The house had been layered with so many curses and spirits, and so much had gone on here that you couldn't heal the house. So together, we did a Zoom across the world, and Greg made sure we were left alone. And together we healed the land. We went back in time to when the islands were created. And it was amazing. It was like a magician's hat where they pull out this big bunch of feathers, coloured feathers. And we could just imagine this island coming out of the ocean and just full of beauty and birds and the beautiful coloured water. It was just amazing. And then Catherine said, she goes, the islands are singing. She goes, I don't know if you'll know this song, because Catherine was brought up in the church. She goes, it's Morning Has Broken. And that was the song I'd been listening to by Cat Stevens, so I did know it. So after we healed the land, I was told to go out and just say, I'm back, I am now here, can I do my work? And Catherine had been told that I couldn't do the work with the bees until we healed the house. So the first week we healed the land, then a week later, Catherine with Greg and we healed the house. And that was quite, it was very beautiful actually, wasn't it? It was really beautiful, and there were some really sorry characters that were just trapped. And one of them had been praying for help. So we believe that my dream was her prayer from 1992. So then that makes you think of all the other people that might have heard that prayer or had that dream but didn't act on it, or maybe acted on a bit of it, went there for holiday but didn't do anything else. So what I did, when we'd arrived in Perth, before we came up to Cocos, we went to Rottnest Island, where interestingly they breed queen bees. And there was this wonderful statue of an Aborigine man, and there's this culture there of whenever the Aborigines went somewhere, they introduced themselves to the land. So they put their hands under their armpits, just to get a bit of body scent, and then pick up the sand and throw it into the sea and say, I am here, I am here, I am me. And that's what I did there. And this was just a little beach by the house had two water on both sides, looking south to all the little islands, which I so longed to visit, but didn't have a boat. So I would walk as far as I could round. But that was a favourite spot for me. So even though the sun was setting, I could hear the island singing, morning is broken. And then the very next day, I was able to bring bees. So I brought over a split from the colony that was stinging me, and this swarm. So this is a frangipane tree, and I just had to go up a ladder and saw with all these people staring at me, and then put it in a box and carry it across. Now you couldn't put things on the ferry, couldn't put bees on the ferry, so I had to have special permission. And again in the book it wasn't that straightforward, we had all kinds of ups and downs, but the community really wanted bees. They wanted bees for their farmland, and the women wanted to learn beekeeping. So this is the frangipane swarm, 8th of August, and then by the 17th of October, that's what it looked like. Now, Emre had offered to sponsor the hives, and he'd sent 10 hives in January. We went there in April. The hives arrived in October. So it was just after this photograph, the hives arrived. So by then, so I borrowed a bit of a hive from Jack and Johnny on the other island, but I was just, the bees were just wild. It was just wild in there. And the women started to come and started to teach them. So here's Maria with her husband Arif. So they were the first ones. And these were the hives as they started to arrive, and we were making splits. And then Greg made this screen so that people could sit behind the screen and just watch the bees. So that was as near as we could get to a sort of safe place. But Maria and Arif became really good friends, and Arif was also the courier for the island. So when you arrive there, if your suitcases to get to us. So we had so much help from them, and they were always giggling, always laughing. And then I wanted to show this because plastic on beaches is outrageous, and it becomes normal. You get to see, when you have a storm, you get to see this. This is what is it called? Gangster. And so we helped. We then got another British couple who became really good friends, who live in Fremantle. They brought a whole group of people up, Sea Shepherd, all volunteers who would spend 3 weeks cleaning the beaches, and we joined them, whenever we could. And this beach was completely cleaned, but then a week after they'd all gone, it was full again. But the other picture there, that's going around South Island, which we'd walk. Now, you're on the edge of a reef. The next bit of land is Antarctica, 9,000 kilometres away. And so you've got these huge boulders bringing up, so you wouldn't go in the sea there because it would just break your legs. And so it just brings up all this stuff. And when you walk this reef and the tide's in, you've got to walk along that. And you've got all these boulders of coral, like bowling balls. So I did it twice, Greg did it once, and again, I talk about it in the book. It's quite an adventure. But I think it's very easy for us to think that we throw things away, but there is no such place as away, or it's Cocos, that's where it ends up. And you see there, you can't get a helicopter in, you can't get boats in, so it just piles up. So underneath the scrub, you've got layers and layers of plastic. And so much unnecessary stuff, so plastic water bottles, flip-flops everywhere, you'd have rucksacks, you just think of all these things that had fallen off boats. And then all the fishing wire, the ropes, toothbrushes, toothpaste tubes, moisturiser bottles. You know, you just realise how much rubbish we have. And you can't say, oh, it's all the Chinese or it's all Indonesian, because actually we ship a lot of our rubbish out there for them to dispose of and process. So you have a lot of European rubbish washing up there. And then this lady, she was on a yacht, and she's English as well. And again, it was amazing how you'd meet people in the shop and get chatting. And the owners of that yacht live on the Isle of Wight. I mean, how crazy is that? And then this lady had an injury, and the owner met us. They came on a tour, and then she said, oh, I think you can heal or help this lady. So she came and had 2 treatments. And it was amazing because she wasn't happy on the boat. She'd taken this job because she always wanted to sail around the world. But actually she's a breathworks and yoga teacher. And after the first treatment, she went back to where all the yachts were. They'd all moor up on Direction Island, the uninhabited island. And the owner messaged me and she said, Nix is now running a yoga and breathwork class on the beach for all the crew of all the yachts. So what the bees did was, being in their resonance, it raised her vibration. So instead of trying to fit into a world that she could never fit into, she then had the strength to be herself. She embodied herself. And then everyone was like, wow, you're so clever, you're so good at what you do. So it was really lovely to help her. And yeah, I love that photo. She was just so happy. So there was a lot of anxiety on the island. So I did have quite a few local people who would come and sit with bees. And then the Germans. There was a video that actually shows the water pouring through. So Catherine had healed the house, got rid of all the spirits, and we had a good few months. So from July, August, September, October, the bees came, I was teaching beekeeping, we had really nice guests, we started to have a nice time, my parents visited, and then we had these Germans. Now Catherine and I, through the work we were doing, we realised that this place was special and that it would be a great place to have a retreat. But not just a retreat to heal people, but for people who are healers to come to then heal the world. Because you knew that whatever happened on that island would resonate out. And I don't know if any of you listened to my podcast, but I had an episode with Veda Austin, who's the water expert. So she measures water when it's crystallised or semi-frozen, and she has proven that water has a consciousness, which just changes everything. And she's really interesting, so if you don't know her, just look her up. But she did an interview for my podcast, which we recorded from here whilst we were having all the hassles with Wi-Fi. So I'd said to her at the beginning of the interview, I said, if I suddenly disappear, just keep talking. And the Wi-Fi went off for 50 minutes, and I came back on and she was still talking. So if you listen to that podcast, you think, Paula's really good at listening. But I wasn't there. Then at the end I came in. So we were planning a retreat, and we were so excited, and we were planning everything. And we spoke to the manager, and the manager said, oh, we've got nobody coming in November, you could do it in November. So we picked November as our date, and we'd got everything ready to go. Just about to press go, and I thought I better just check with the manager. So I checked again. I just said, still these dates all right? And he went, yeah. And then straight away went, oh no, we've got guests. He said they're not on the system, but they've just cropped up. 32 nights they were staying in November. So I said, well, if they're staying 32 nights, could they just go and stay somewhere else for that week? And he's like, oh no, they're paying cash, and they're just staying here, and they want to be in the house. Couldn't they just join the retreat? It was like, no, absolutely no way, because we don't know who these people are, and this is a healing retreat. We want to know that we've got the right people coming. So we had to stop and think, okay, we'll reschedule. So we rescheduled for February. Well then, 2nd of November, this couple arrive on the plane, and Greg goes to meet them, and they get off the plane in wheelchairs. Now I'm quite sympathetic to anybody in a wheelchair, but this house has stairs. All the rooms are upstairs. We're on a tropical island with no transport. So straight away it was like, can we do this? But they'd used the wheelchairs to get on the plane, and then Greg had 2 other couples that were with them, and they were both in a state of trauma. There was a Texan or Kentucky Texan couple, father and daughter, who had placed bets on the plane that the couple that delayed the plane by an hour were going to be staying in the same place. The other couple were thinking, if that couple who've delayed the plane are in the same place as us, this is hell. You know, our once-in-a-lifetime trip to Cocos is ruined. And of course, the people that delayed the plane were our Germans. And they'd come from East Germany, so they were very eager to tell us about, you know, quite rightly, how awful the largest part of their life was living in East Germany. And they just had this air of takeover. So we had the big ballroom, and there was not a lot of furniture, but they would just lay their stuff out and demand that that was where they'd be. We had Milkgate, we had all these, you know, crazy things that happened. And Catherine and I had been WhatsApping almost daily until the Germans arrived. And then whatever happened, it was just crisis after crisis, and these people were really, really demanding. And then Catherine was like, what's going on? You know, I need to speak to you. So we get on a WhatsApp, and she goes, what's going on? And I went, oh God, it's just awful. We've got this awful people here. We just don't know what to do. So Catherine tuned in, and I'll talk about it a lot more in depth in there, and you can believe this or not, but this is what happened. This German guy had arrived with his father and grandfather in spirit, who were Nazi officers. They'd also brought 300 other Nazi soldiers and 400 Jewish tortured women, all in spirit, and they'd all turned up at the house, and boy, could we feel it. It was the darkest, most awful, awful, awful time. And when we came back, you know, you couldn't even mention German to Greg. You know, it was just so awful. And so Catherine, when she tuned into this, she said, right, we've got to sort it all out, which she did. But instead of the gentle, caring, talking to these spirits and listening to their stories, this was, get out, go. It was, I've never seen anything like it. And you'd think, oh, it's 20 minutes. It was about 2 hours, wasn't it, of just clearing. And what was extraordinary was that couple were always up at 6 in the morning, and we slept. We definitely felt after this session things were better. We went to bed, got up at 6, and the Germans weren't up, and then that was a bit of a worry. It was like, oh my gosh, what if we've removed all these entities that have been attached to him, and now he was late 80s, 86 I think, and he had been saying he wanted to die on the islands. So we were a bit worried, and we started to think he wasn't up at 6, he wasn't up at 7, and we thought, oh God, you know, what if he dies, you know, on our watch in the house? So then the wife, who to that point had not spoken any English, comes running down the hall and to where our kitchen was, and she goes, Paula, are you there? And what Catherine had said in our healing and sort of exorcism of these spirits was that we need to live in love and peace. We just need to live in love and peace. So this lady comes running down the corridor. She goes, Paula, are you there? And there was another episode as well where he'd got angry and he'd shouted at me, and Guess had intervened, and it'd all gone to a bit of a head by the time we'd spoken to Catherine. And she comes down the corridor, so I go, yes, you know, you all right? And she said, oh, it's Franz, he's not well, he's not woken up. And I thought, oh God, no, this is not what we need at all. And she said, but he's all right. She goes, I think he got angry because he missed his medication. He hadn't taken his medication. That's why he got so angry. She goes, I'm so sorry. She goes, from now on, you just speak with me. You just talk to me. She goes, we just want to live in love and peace. So the exact words that Catherine had used. So I hugged her. But what had happened was after he'd blown up at us, and whilst I was on WhatsApp or Zoom with Catherine, Greg had told the manager, and the manager had emailed them and said they had to go, they had to leave on the next plane because there'd just been too much. So then we had a real episode because he didn't get out of bed, so we went to the doctors because we thought we ought to tell the doctors that we're not trying to kill this guy, but if he dies, this is what's happened. And then the doctors told the police, and the police came around and wanted to see him because they said, we can't have a death on the island. We haven't got the funds or the manpower, so we can't have anybody dying. Can we see them? So we were knocking on the door and they were like, no, you can't come in, but he'll be better, he'll be fine. So the next day, by lunchtime, he was up and out. But this water coming through the roof was what triggered all the extreme stuff. We were just about to go to the ball. We were going to have a night off, and it was the barefoot ball on the other island. So there were special ferries run, and we were really looking forward to it. And we'd got all dressed up, and we were walking through the house. All the guests were out, and I heard water running. And I looked in the ballroom and could just see this water pouring through the roof. And it was like, no, this is just awful. And so we couldn't go to the ball straight away, and Greg was phoning the owner and trying to sort it out. We had to try and get plumbers out. So we had no hot water then for 3 weeks, which really triggered the guests, or these particular guests. Bear in mind, the cold water ran at 29 degrees, so it wasn't really a problem. But but we did actually get to the ball, and we had about an hour and a half, I think, before the ferry went back. So all the Muslims live with us on the other island, and there's Thomas, who's actually New Zealand but married Umira on the right there. So they have a cafe there. Zuleika in the pink is one of my bee ladies. So yeah, really lovely people. So we sort of didn't really connect with the white people on the islands. We were sort of very much part of the Cocos Malay. So by the time we'd had the Germans, and they did stay for 32 nights, and then there was a cyclone coming, and so the manager was coming back to stay in the house for Christmas, and we did want to be there for Christmas, even though it's a Muslim island. We just thought it would be nice to be there. But we couldn't be in the house with him, so we decided to take 4 weeks off. But having not been paid, we were on a tight budget. But we had all these guests who'd stayed with us that we'd looked after. And this was the big thing we learned, was that it didn't matter if you had rats and crabs and cockroaches and spiders and awful fellow guests. If you looked after people, they could still have the trip of a lifetime. And we learned that we could really look after people, and we could tell them how the island worked, and we could give them good experience. And so we kept in touch with a lot of them, and then when we realised we were going to have 4 weeks off the island, I emailed them all. I just went, right, all of you who said we must pop in, who was serious. And we had 3 or 4 couples, didn't we, in Tasmania. So we went to Tasmania, which was really great. You can taste some Tasmanian honey. But just Christmas Eve, I went to Weymouth because I was born in Weymouth, and I wanted to see what Weymouth in Tasmania looked like, and I thought you might find that interesting too. So that's what Weymouth in Tasmania looks like. Very, very empty, but really beautiful. And then just down the road was Lulworth. Quite bizarre. But yeah, imagine our Weymouth looking like that. So then we came back. We didn't want to come back. We had Christmas. I was quite ill over Christmas, and we really didn't want to go back. We were exhausted. We were tired. We felt we'd been working so hard for nothing. I had to make the decision about the retreat in February. The ships that were meant to come every 6 weeks hadn't been coming, so the November ship hadn't arrived, didn't actually get there till February. The owners had said, what do we need for the hotel to run? We'd given them a big list, nothing was sent, so we didn't have spare sheets, we couldn't do, we had to do hot changes all the time. We didn't have beach towels, we didn't have garden furniture. So to try and run a retreat was just impossible. Plus we couldn't get any help. The manager had said, oh yeah, if you want cleaners, if you want extra cooks, I'll get them in. Nobody would work for them. So nobody would help. They all wanted to help us, but they couldn't come in. So to try and run a retreat was just impossible. So we made the decision not to do the retreat, which was really hard because it's such an amazing place. And John and Danielle, as soon as they knew we were going to spend a year, they booked to come and stay in January. So we had to come back. So we came back and they stayed in the house with us, and we had an amazing time. It just really, we had fun, we just had fun. And Yeah. They then, what they'd also done was she'd applied for a teaching job, so they now live on the islands. So they realised, well, crikey, if Paula and Greg can come over from England, we might as well have a go. So they're now there for 2 years. So we're going back in March and we'd stay them. And that's the sunset that we'd get every night from the beach. So we would sit in these really not 5-star furnishings and watch the sunset with our guests. And then the beach where I would look south was just along there. And then we had wild bees in the tree there. So it's just... And then Randy and Doug came. Oh, and we were really low. I mean, even though we'd had John and Danielle, we were still really low. And then Randy and Doug came. And I got used to walking here, but that really stretched you, didn't it? In your comfort zone,
yes.
just walking.
Yeah.
Like you were just going to walk into that water there. But oh my gosh, you know, it meant so much to us to have friends come and see us, and to see the beauty, but also to see the craziness that we were living in, because you just can't imagine. You know, we do live in a 5-star existence here, and to go and try and survive on a paradise island is really difficult. And what was amazing was once Randy came, so Randy had booked, so she was going to help with the retreat. And the first Sunday she was there, every Sunday I'd been doing bee workshops, and I'd get 1 or 2 people come, and I just kept doing it. And then as soon as Randy was there, they all came. They all came. It was amazing. And then it just took off, and we had the mothers, the daughters, the childminders, everyone just came, and it was just phenomenal. And they all fell in love with the bees. They just really, really loved the bees. So this is Maria, who she had the farm. So Maria and Arif with the quad bikes. So she was the first one, and she helped me remove bees and things from different places. And she's a real natural with the bees. But they've got this little farm, and they noticed a really dramatic increase in their fruit and veg. Now bear in mind, you don't really have seasons there. You have like a 6-week annual cycle. So you'll have spring, summer, autumn, and then winter for a tree within 6 weeks. So you've got the trees in bloom, then the flowers sort of drop off, then the leaves will all go green, and then you'll get the seeds, and then the leaves will drop off, and then the spring will happen again. And it was like 6 to 8 weeks all year round. So we thought we could go there and just scatter a load of seeds, and we could have all our fresh food. But you've got crabs, you've got rats, you've got rain that you've never seen so heavy, which would just break anything that's trying to grow in it. And then you've got nematodes in the soil, so to try and grow stuff was really, really, really hard. So you are dependent on the ship. But we were learning then about the bees, and what I noticed was the bees didn't eat their honey. And this was incredible, because we, you know, to not feed bees sugar is one thing, and so the antidote or the method that you use here is you leave the honey for the bees so they can feed on the honey through the winter. But they're making honey, but they're not eating it because there's year-round nectar. The whole island always had something in bloom, and it really made me realise, oh my goodness me, if bees are eating honey, they're desperate. They would always choose fresh nectar. So when anybody says they want to have bees, they want to keep bees, you've got to plant more flowers, because all our bees are starving before we even start. There's not enough food for the bees. So the fact that they're eating all their honey, or we're taking the honey, then they're eating all the sugar, no wonder the bees are dying and sick, because they're not getting nutritious diet. So that was really eye-opening to think that these bees are working all year round. They don't need to store the honey, but because their heritage is Apis mellifera, they're used to storing the honey, and that's what they do. And then this is Zuleika, who was widowed, mother of 4 kids, and her husband died aged 40 while we were there. We became really close. She was a really close friend. She worked for the tourist office. And there she is. And I think, Mum, was that you with her? I was just trying to figure out who it was. I couldn't realise who the other one was. But, you know, bare hands, you could be barehanded most of the time. No, with the gloves on though, isn't it? But again, with her being widowed, it really helped helped to have the bees. It gave her something else to focus on. I mean, as if she didn't have enough, worked full time. She's since opened up a health food shop on the island, and she's got 4 kids. The eldest turned 11 today. But yeah, she really loved the bees. And so the bees then, we took them from the garden. So each person actually had bees in their own garden. So we've got Asma there, who's beekeeping with her daughter. And I just said, you know, tell me one thing. What do you feel about having bees? She said, I get little friends and biodiversity from my garden. She grows a lot of fruit and veg. My family loves the pure honey, and I like to think that in doing this small part of keeping bees, I'm helping nature, Mother Earth, and thus humankind to endure. And then there's Noor, who turned up when Randy came, and she's really interesting. She'd been working on the mainland. She's like really westernised. I mean, it's quite extraordinary when you get used to people talking Cocos Malay, and then you get some with really strong Australian accents. And she works for the water board, doesn't she? Really strong, hard as nails, very muscly, and she's got the angry bees, the really angry bees. So she calls them her tropical gangsters. But this is what the spiritual beekeeping is all about, is the bees are a mirror to the environment you're in. And with Cocos being such a pure, clean, pristine environment, the bees are generally really happy. And what we noticed was the bee ladies on Cocos were getting a lot of honey, really lovely clear honey that you can taste up there, and they weren't getting stung. The bees were calm, whereas on West Island the bees were more aggressive, and the beekeepers there, Johnny and Jack, were getting stung. You know, the honey was really dark, just completely different. So the bees are reflecting their environment. And I've written a bit about AI and how AI, we need to look at AI as like a mirror to humanity. So how whatever we put into AI, it comes out. So it can look like AI is tapping into other realms or other dimensions, but it's only the people using it who are putting it in, and then that comes out. But the difference is the bees have a soul, have spirit. You know, so we've got to be very conscious of our environment, because we're all energetic beings and it's all being reflected back to us. So here we are, but without Maria, unfortunately. And so then, can anyone spot a queen? Can you spot a queen bee?
that one,
Quite a bit longer. So this chart on the right, there's a chap called Adam Topolowski in Poland who studies the wings of bees. And I met him when I was speaking in Saudi Arabia. And he needs more samples, he needs more people to send their bees in. And when we went to Rapa Nui, he'd studied the bees there and said that they've got heavier wings so that they can fly in the wind. And Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, they've had bees about the same amount of time that Cocos has. So we sent him some samples, and what came back, and even though he's talked me through this, and other people have looked at this when we were at Apimondia, but whether you understand it or not, where our bees are. So Apis mellifera is the European honeybee, Western European honeybee, mellifera, and Intermissa is actually African. It's a species from Morocco. So how did those bees get here? And the bees that I moved were from wild swarms. So could it be that the bees were originally on the island from the original settlers, rather than from the RAF chap who brought Western honeybees? But what's also interesting is illegally, queens have been shipped up from mainland Australia over the last 5 years to make sure there wasn't interbreeding, and yet they're not coming through. The Italian bees are not coming through. We're still having the Intermissa. Now, what's really interesting is that the Intermissa has natural grooming behaviour, and so they can perhaps protect the bees in Australia against Varroa. So isn't that interesting that you've got that happening? So when we go back, I'll get more samples. There's a Russian scientist who can actually do proper DNA. So we have to collect bees in alcohol. So the ladies there have been trying to do it, but because they're Muslim, it's created all kinds of problems about where do they store the ethanol and who handles it, and a bit more brutal. So this is the honey, to show you the different colours that you get through the months, through the seasons. And I did ship back a load, but it all got confiscated. So the one bit I've got is some that I'd sent to Mum. I'd got 2 packages out, one to Randy, one to Mum. So I've got a bit there that you can taste. And then, again, while Randy was there, the elders all came to the house. Because the house was healed, they all came, and it was just wonderful. They all drove up with their buggies, all lined up, and then all sat in. And we could talk to them about the bees. So it's just amazing. And then we had a party before we left as well, and this was the people that really stuck out after the party. We had a lot of elders as well, but a lot of them had left. But these were our friends, you know, when we first got there we didn't know anybody. And we really became part of that community. And Ozzy and his wife Christine, their daughters just got married, so on Facebook I've shared a few of their videos. They've been doing live videos of their traditional wedding. And then the guy next to him, he made me a machete. And then Naini, without the head covering, she used to do a lot of cooking for us. And her mum sat in front who just used to giggle. And Cassidy, is Cassidy there? Coconuts? No, he's not. He's gone.
No, I didn't see him.
But yeah, just amazing. It's, you know, I know it's boring for you lot, but for us it's like really, really meant a lot. So then we came back. It was really hard to come back. Hadn't made the documentary. I've got about 7,000 photographs and 4,000 videos. So we need the editor to try and put that together, because the Cocos Malay have got a really important story. Where the government had kicked off the Clunes Ross many years ago, they're now trying to kick off the people, and they're telling them the islands are sinking because of climate change. But actually, while we were there, the islands are rising. It's a coral atoll. It's formed by coral being brought in from the sea, and the coral fish turn the coral into sand, which then rises to level, and when you've got the sand coming out of the water, seeds take. So the landmass is actually increasing. The highest point is, you know, you're 10 feet above sea levels, that's the altitude, and quite often the tides were higher than the land. But they've got an important story, and maybe those bees could be the bees that would save the island, because if those bees are important for Australia, then Cocos could become a breeding place for those bees to then ship out to the rest of Australia. So wouldn't it be great if we could prove that and find that? And then also, with such a pristine environment with the prayers, the honey could also be medicinal. In fact, without a doubt it would be medicinal. So wouldn't it be wonderful to actually prove that and have this amazing place in the world that could be real Cocos healing? So that's my spa now. So when we came back, had to more or less start from scratch. So this was my old painting studio. Now I've got a colony of bees in the old bookcase, and you can lay on the bed. Now you may have heard of bee beds, but there's a Romanian doctor, apitherapist, Dr. Stefan Stangu, who's on my podcast, who says that the human energy is too dense for the bees. If we lay on top of the hives, it's just not so good for the bees. But if you're within 2 meters, there's another podcast episode I did with Yankee, who's a young student in Turkey, and within 2 meters, you benefit from the vibration. It really helps, that frequency and that vibration. So what I've been doing since we've come back is I'm a Reiki master, so I do Reiki, tuning into the spirit of the bees on the beds next to the beehives, and already it's been lovely, really lovely. And then I also have people who just come and lay just for 30 minutes just to be by the bees. I had a lady who came just 2 weeks ago, who suffers really badly from depression. She's in her 80s and always had depression and anxiety. And she said after she had 45 minutes, just sat in there with them, laying with them, and she slept every night since, and she's had no anxiety, and she doesn't feel depressed, just from being the bees. But she did like watching the bees coming and going through the tube. So friends who do all sorts of crazy stuff, and Vedi Austin with her water. What I was interested in was semi-freezing the water. And I have another friend who does essences, flower essences, and she said, well, have you made an essence of your bee water? So what I did was got some pure filtered water, and this is frozen, 10 minutes frozen, just the water. Then what I did is I put the water in a glass bottle in that observation hive for 24 hours. And then I pulled out a bit and froze. Can you see anything? I like to think we've got the spirit of the bee is in the water. So if you understand homeopathy, water holds the memory, it holds the consciousness, and the healing energy of the bees, which I feel the bees are here to help us all, they're here to show us. So in that water, it's vibrational frequency. So I've got a little pot for all of you. So when you leave, you can have a little pot to take away. And all you do is just put a few drops under your tongue, or you can put it in water, and then it will help raise your vibration, raise your frequency to that of the bees. And just let me know if you find any great differences. And then I got to go to Apamondia, and there's a story in the book as well, because that was another crazy situation where I really didn't go and then did go. And there's Adam on the right, who analysed the bee wings from Poland, and then here's Dr. Liz Barber on the left, who was studying the honey for us and the pollen, but none of it are on any databases, so we've got more work to do. But there I've got my poster that was in Copenhagen, Apamondia, and we all met there. It was just by chance. She came round, then Adam came round. So to have a picture of the three of us, all with our connection with Cocos. And obviously the hives were there, and I was there with Emre with the hives. And he's actually translating the book into Turkish and has ordered 1,000 copies sent to all of his clients. So, it's all been worth it. So this is what we've learned. We grow through the challenges. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg, you know, to try and explain a year and also a lifetime of connecting with spirit. Before I went, I did woo stuff with bees, but I didn't really talk about it. But now I realise that the bees are the woo, they are the spirit, they are angelic beings, they are here to show us what's going wrong in the world and what we need to address. So the bees are dying because we're sharing the same environment as them. Whatever is killing them is also harming us. And this is why so many of us are called to the bees, why people are interested in bees, want to know more, think they want to keep them, is because the bees are calling us, they're calling all of us. They called me all across the oceans, knowing that I would do a crazy trip for bees. But maybe you've been thinking, oh, I want to keep bees, or I want to plant more flowers. So this is what we need to learn about, and this is what the book Spiritual Beekeeping is about, is seeing all these connections that we have in the world and how the bees are holding the earth like a big mesh all around the earth, and they're just connecting everybody. And all these connections I've managed to have through bees all around the world. And then the honeys are the medicine from the plants. So you've all heard Manuka is a medicinal honey, but actually all honeys are medicine because the plants are medicine. But it's only as good as the environment it's come from. So we need to look at our environment, and if our plants are being poisoned, then that's going to come through in the honey. So, and the other thing they really taught us was how to feel. And I said earlier on about feeling like a queen bee with her wings clipped. Now in conventional beekeeping, to stop your bees swarming and to be a proper beekeeper and managing your hives, you clip your queen bee so they're not going to swarm.